Excellent. Thank you for the recording, Melissa. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CSLP 2025 Summer Symposium. This is all about Unearth a Story, which, of course, we're all really excited about. We've been anticipating the dinosaurs for some years now, and so we're finally there. And actually, of course, it's December, and we're talking about summer, which we do here pretty much all year round. But I know you don't always talk about summer in December, but hopefully you're in a cozy nook. I've got my CSLP hoodie on. So does Melissa. It's cold where she is in Vermont. It's cold where I am here in Kansas. So I just want to welcome you all in today. And hopefully we can just go over a couple housekeeping items. Today's schedule, and you can come and go from this webinar. You can come in and out as you need to. I know folks have to cover desks and things like that, so feel free to just use your link to come on back in. And of course, we are recording, so you can, if you miss something, you can always get it on the recording. This schedule is in Eastern Standard Time. I'm here in Central Time, and I know we have some probably really early birds like Dan here from the West Coast. And so hopefully they have coffee or whatever their beverage of choice is in the morning. Today's schedule is going to feature Dan first as our keynote speaker. We're going to move on to some Unearth a Story manual highlights from our content editor, Amanda Raish. And then we're going to be moving on to Unearthing Science with the folks at the Detroit Zoo. And then finally, we're going to connect, create, and celebrate. And we're talking about summer reading decorations, with which we all absolutely love to do, with some wonderful library staff from Long Island. And so we thank all of you for being here today. And couple housekeeping things. We're in webinar mode today. We're not in meeting mode. So you're muted and your cameras are off. Please use the Q&A, which is down in the menu bar on the lower part of your Zoom screen. You can just roll over that and the black bar should pop up and you should see a Q&A button there, as well as a closed caption button. We do have a live captioner with us today, so if you do want to take advantage of the captions, please do so down there. We will try to get to all of your questions. This is a really large group, and we always try to do our best with that. We are recording these. They will be on our professional development page. That link is posted everywhere. You'll see it during the break, so you will be able to go to it. And of course, after the webinar, you will get an email, and it will have the link to the recordings. And we will post the transcripts as well of the chat, as well as any other resources that our presenters provide for us today. There is a downloadable CE certificate, because I know some of you are on this and want to get your CE credit. It is on the professional development page, and we will post that again. And it's just a downloadable Word document, and you can fill it out. It's just basically the honor system in using that. So I know some states have some more rigorous they require proof of attendance, and we can provide proof of attendance. And so we will be doing that for any state reps that ask us for that. Today, I want to put out a huge thank you and a shout out to our sponsor, Hoopla Midwest Tape. We have a wonderful relationship with this company, and they are sponsoring our symposium for the second time. And we're just so happy to have them. And they really do help us keep this event no cost to those that are here. And so, they bring great digital materials to us and are a huge provider in that area. And I know a lot of public libraries really, and patrons really love the Hoopla product. And so shout out to them and thank you so much for sponsoring us today. You will be seeing more from them in their digital collections the build up to summer starting in January. We do a newsletter feature with them in April or May as well. And so you'll be seeing us post some of their resources. And I know they're behind the scenes coming up with great digital products related to the Unearth a Story theme for you. So why Unearth a Story? This theme was chosen way back in 2021. Our members choose our themes, and then the next year in 2022, they chose the slogan to go along with the paleontology, archaeology, and dinosaur theme. And we just felt this was a really good theme. digging into books and uncovering and exploring the past, the joy of celebrating the joy of discovery. And we just thought it was a very adaptable theme. And that's what we strive to provide at CSLP is really an adaptable theme that can be used in a number of different ways in your communities, whatever suits your community. And it's, the dinosaurs are just super fun. So, what is CSLP? We are the Collaborative Summer Library Program. We were formed way back in 1987. We are about to have our 40th anniversary in 2027, which is going to be really exciting for us, a big, big milestone. And it was a group of public libraries that really wanted to share resources around summer reading programming because, we share as librarians, we're really good at it. And so that concept is still much the same today after 40 years. We have 40 states and island nations that are involved in doing this work, and we're definitely fueled and shaped by our members and many, many volunteers, over 150 people that are just really dedicated to seeing summer programming thrive and grow. So we are a nonprofit organization. So any profit from the sale of summer reading items goes right back into our organization, and we can then bring events to you like this, and hopefully other professional development, like our um, webinar that we do every November. With our patron access committee. So look out for more professional development in the future. We do have a professional development committee, and I know they have some great ideas, and that is something our board is dedicated to providing. These are all of our member states and island nations in purple. And so you can see we really do have a lot of reach nationally as well as internationally with our island nations. And so we're very proud of this graphic and the purple you see here, all the states that are official members of CSLP. You can also join CSLP as an individual library if you are in a non-member state. So there are other libraries that do join us annually and can pick and choose year to year if they want to use our program or not. We are a very unique organization. We are a nonprofit, but we also have our e-commerce arm in our shop.cslpreads.org site for our products. We're a publisher in terms of our manual that we put out around our theme every year. We're member driven. We're a content provider. We run by committee, and we work with designers and artists every year to come up with the theme and the artwork. And so we're also product developers. So we try to, through our vendor committee, really come up with unique products that match the theme that aren't available anywhere else in the marketplace. And so are hopefully really unique to our program and theme every year. We are also run by a board of directors. Shout out to Kate Smith, who is our current president. She organized this event last year, and then she passed the baton to Abby Chuman, who I would like to have a shout out to right now. She was the one who put together this event, and she is our incoming president and is about to do a lot more volunteer work for us in 2026. So thank you, Abby. And we have a wonderful board of not only frontline library staff, but also state reps. And they're very strong folks. They really bring a lot to the table and care very deeply about CSLP. So wonderful folks to work with. So thank you. I am Dawn Krause. I am your executive director here at CSLP, and we are a small but mighty staff. We have Melissa Hook with us here. She's our administrative manager. I'm sure many of you have talked to her via customer service, but she's behind the scenes here today at the wheel of Zoom. Also, Tabitha, many of you have probably talked to her in the past year if you've done any kind of invoicing billing with us. She is our newest addition to CSLP as our accounting specialist. And then Amanda is also new as of spring last year, but she was a state rep, so she was very familiar already with CSLP, and she is now our content editor, has taken over our manual and other content pieces. So we have a really strong team here, and I'm very, very proud of the work we do with the staff that we have. And we can't do that without volunteers. And so that's really another aspect of all that we do here. We do have a brand new strategic plan. We have a brand new vision and a brand new mission that we just accomplished at our board retreat this past spring. This is for 26 to 28 years. And so I just wanted to point out that it is here if you wanted to read it. But our vision really is we envision vibrant summer reading programs available to everyone through their library. So pretty simple vision, but one we really believe in. Also, I would be negligent if I didn't at least mention Color Our World because some of you probably feel like we just finished summer reading and Color Our World. But our statistics committee annually does come up with a great report, and we rely on our member libraries and other libraries to provide some summer reading program data to us every year if they so choose. And we do get some great numbers from that. And so there is on our website, and I will post the link in the chat when I'm through here where you can find the full report on what Color Our World looked like in terms of statistics and feedback. We do take your feedback very seriously, and that is one avenue that libraries have of several to give us feedback throughout the year. And so Color Our World was super successful overall, and we were really happy with it. And we hope for the same for Unearth a Story. And finally, the eye of the dino here is on Dan Santat because he is here with us as our keynote. We really thank him for joining us today. I'm going to do just a brief introduction and then I'm going to hand it over to him. He's much more interesting than me, and I know you want to hear from him. So Dan Santat has published over 100 books for children. His most notable works include A First Time for Everything, a National Book Award winner, The Adventures of Beagle, The Unimaginary Friend, Caldecott Medal winner, Are We There Yet? #1 New York Times bestseller, and After the Fall, New York Times bestseller. His artwork is also featured in the best-selling The Misfits by Lisa Yee, Detective Duck by Henry Winkler and Lynn Oliver, and Dave Pilkey's Ricky Ricotta. Dan lives in Southern California with his wife, two kids, and many, many pets. And I know he said he had to banish the pets this morning. Please welcome Dan as he presents For the Love of Reading. And I'm going to stop my share, Dan.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I just want to begin by saying I was a little surprised to not see that California was a member of CSLP, and I apologize. It is a lovely honor to be here. And today I was going to talk to you a little bit about how I became a fan of reading. And I'm going to start up my presentation here. And I think we're going to start with this unsettling article that I think we all saw in the last few months. And the study stated that in the last 20 years, reading for pleasure has gone down 40%. My first gut reaction was I wasn't exactly surprised. When you look around at the world and you look at everyone engaging with social media and video games and all these other things, streaming devices, everyone's need for sudden fulfillment, instant gratification off of their phones and things like that. The world is in this transition, and I started conversing with other author friends because it is an unsettling statistic, and some of my other friends had also mentioned things that they had done on their own in terms of research. One thing I was unaware of, which recently came to my attention, was that younger generation parents, millennials, Gen Z, they don't read to their kids, which I found rather surprising. And the reason is because they felt like it was, uh, some said it was too much work. Others said that being raised by a generation of electronic devices and interaction with social media and things like that, that it just wasn't the idea of reading just wasn't really embedded in their culture in of growing up. Um, and as you're watching time goes on, you're seeing that. I don't know about your perspective. From my perspective, I have this amazing library here in Alhambra, California. They actually used it as the public library in Parks and Recreation. It's a beautiful library, but it goes relatively untouched, and I find that to be a little unsettling. And so, to my distress, I thought I would talk about how I became a reader because you see you see this slide. You see me as a National Book Award winner, and I promise you that I was probably the last person in the world who would have ever expected to be in that moment. My youth was not filled with a love of reading. My childhood was mainly um, this need to fit in, and having parents who were not aware of the importance of reading in Western culture. I'll give you an example. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York, 1975. I was an only child. My mother has an autoimmune disease called lupus, and she wanted four kids. She could only have me. And my father was a doctor, came to Brooklyn, New York, 1968. He was a resident at the Long Island College Hospital. My mother was a nurse. Um, and one of the things about being an immigrant coming into this country is this lack of understanding about the culture in the respect that when my father lived in Bangkok, his knowledge about movies like Shane or Paul Anka records or Elvis Presley was a type of currency to make you more cool among your friends. If you knew anything about American pop culture and you could tell, all the other friends about it, you were cool because you were in on the cool stuff. And that's what brought my father over here for a residency. He actually got a free education from the Thai government because they needed more doctors. And he thought, well, it wouldn't hurt to come to America to get my residency so I could get an experience of America for a few years and then go back to Thailand because the intention was that the Thai government would give everyone a free medical school education in the hopes that they would give back to the country. The Thai government did not see it that way. Uh, they took offense to the fact that he went to America and they thought, like any other Thai medical student, they were going to get this free education and then run off and make their fortune. Um, and, despite my father's, desire to come back to Thailand, the government said no. And so we were stuck here. And so my parents quickly shifted. New York in 1975 was not the safest place to grow up, and so we made our path towards Southern California, and we settled here in 1978 in Southern California, in a little town called Camarillo, California. So the best way to describe it is that you have Los Angeles here in Southern California on the coast, and then about an hour north you have Santa Barbara, which is in between. And then in between, you have all this farmland, and it's known as Ventura County. And I grew up in Camarillo, and so I was just outside of Los Angeles, and I stuck out like a sore thumb. I was one of a handful of Asian kids, um, and with my parents, it was very important for me to assimilate, to fit in with the other kids, so that I didn't feel left out, and they did everything they could to make me feel comfortable. Birthday parties, sleepovers, playing Little League, soccer, things like that. When I came to kindergarten, one of the first things that I realized was different was around the holidays. And everybody was talking about this man called Santa Claus, and I had absolutely no idea who Santa Claus was. And all the kids would look at me and they'd say, well, of course, Santa Claus is this man who comes down the chimney and he gives gifts to all the good kids. And my parents quickly shifted, bought the tree, bought the lights. I participated, but they never wanted me to ever feel left out. And so, um, yeah, they did everything they could to help me fit in. One of the biggest glaring factors of having immigrant parents was that I was not very familiar with any of the classics of books wrote growing up. You know, I did not have parents that grew up with books that they loved that they could share with me. My parents were very much utility kind of readers. So my father thought that, you know, with this dream of me one day becoming a doctor, it would probably be more prevalent for me to read science books, or, you know, to prepare for math class, I would read math books or things like that. And so right off the bat, reading was just absolutely treacherous. Like I could not stand reading because it just wasn't fun. And that's something that I hear in a lot of cases these days, is that reading just isn't fun. It feels like work. That's the thing that you hear these days. And it snowballed. You know, when you feel like you don't like reading, it takes a lot of effort to regain, you know, I guess that form of trust in a teacher or somebody to say, well, you know, you may not like reading, but trust me, you will like this. And, you know, as I was growing up, there was this required reading of these books that, you know, that people would put in their curriculum because they felt like maybe it was a classic or that it was required. But it was also these stories that I couldn't relate to the characters. Um, you know, I do remember reading Red Badge of Courage, you know, reading about the Civil War, which was something that didn't apply to me either by age or just by culture. Where the Red Fern Grows, admittedly, I did actually love that book. That was a book that my teacher read to me, and I think we all understand how important it is to be read to. A Wrinkle in Time, another fantastic book. Still a book that I struggled with, and I think I quickly learned that I was somebody who had very poor comprehension skills. So I would read a book, but it would take me a long, long time because it just wouldn't stick. It wouldn't get absorbed in my brain. And so I read very, very slowly. And at that point, also, I think I was young enough that I didn't really know what I liked to read. And leaning into the utility side of reading that my parents instilled in me and my need to fit in with other kids, I actually resorted to other books. I wanted to know how to play baseball. And if you watch baseball, you can kind of get it, but then there are little nuances of the sport that maybe need a little bit further explanation. And this predates videos. Predates, you know, the internet. And so I would go to the library and I would get books to read to teach myself how to play baseball, um, how to throw a ball, how to catch a ball, how to hit, you know, stepping into the pitch when you're swinging. These are little details that helped me as an only child. I didn't have anybody to teach me how to play baseball. I mean, I did have some friends, but I think having a lot of guy friends growing up, you know, the factor of patience isn't necessarily a strong suit. So I would read these books and I would practice in the backyard by myself, you know, usually with like a net or something to catch the ball if I was practicing batting, for instance. The other big factor that really helped me assimilate into American pop culture was film and television. Um, Now, for those of you who grew up in the 1980s, we all understand it was a pretty wacky time, you know, for film and television. You know, if you wanted a crime-fighting car show, you got it in Knight Rider. You wanted a crime-fighting helicopter show, there were two crime-fighting helicopter shows. You wanted crime-fighting boat, crime-fighting, motorcycle. They had all those shows, and then you had these crazy movies, you know, these shows like Manimal where he was a man by day, but he was a panther at night fighting crime. Like these are just these crazy drug-induced, shows that I was I was absolutely smitten with. Of course, there were probably shows I shouldn't have watched, but we all understand it was the 80s and everything was just reckless and free, and we were Gen Xers, these latchkey kids where, my parents and all the kids in the neighborhood, we would just be shoved outside and they would say, I don't want to see your face till the sun comes down. And so we were left to our own devices. And with that, there was less of a propensity to ban books, I mean, I find it bizarre that we live in a generation where we as kids were free to do whatever we wanted. And now we just hover over our kids and we tell them, don't do this, don't do that, don't read this. While at the same time, I firmly remember that in third grade, Flowers in the Attic was one of the most popular books at my school. And now that I reflect on that, I think to myself, what whose idea was it to give a child flowers in the attic? Um, but going back to what I'm saying is there was this assimilation into pop culture which gave me, like my father, this credibility of fitting in. And there was this fun factor that came with being able to discuss a story or a show afterwards, like the very next night after, an episode of Dallas or Dukes of Hazzard had aired, and you can talk about it with your friends. Um, and once I started making friends at school, I started gravitating towards other mediums of storytelling that were not books, but were forms of storytelling where I could participate in the narrative. Secret of Monkey Island is probably one of my most favorite video games, and it was one of these video games in the era of graphic adventures that they would call them, where basically it was one long story, and then you had to navigate the main character through certain tasks to advance the story. And one of the most addicting parts of the game was that I needed to know what would happen next. I'm not one of those kids that was playing, Pac-Man and trying to get a high score. I was fully immersed into a video game world where there was a story and I needed to know what happened next. I also had friends who played Dungeons and Dragons, and the idea of rolling up a character and putting yourself in this magical world and participating as a hero really was something that I connected to. Was connected to the story, but especially the idea of drawing. And you'd go to the library or you'd read a newspaper, and I quickly realized that I was someone who was in love with comics. Now, for those of you who, I don't think anybody's a stranger to the fact that pairing images with words dramatically improves comprehension. And I needed that visual in order to help me carry the story along. I could blow through a whole pile of Garfield books in a day. Um, and there was this sense of satisfaction that I had, this sense of pride as a child saying, "Hey, look at how many books I read today." There was a sense of accomplishment that maybe reading wasn't so difficult because I was able to read this stack of books. I was actually speaking with a librarian in Albany a couple weeks ago, and I was asking if their summer reading program still had those activities where if you read a book, you would get this sticker sheet, and then for every book you read, you would get a sticker. And she told me, no, that's not a thing anymore. Kids don't care about stickers. But for me, that was a huge thing. Like I remember there was a theme at the Camarillo Library. It was like the magic of reading, and then it had Harry Houdini, and then he had this magic top hat, and then for every book that you read, you would add a gold sticker, and the sticker would look like it was coming out of the magic top hat. And then I believe at the end of collecting all those stickers, you would get like a poster or like an ice cream party or something like that. And that was something that really connected me to the library because it was forming this sense of community. and that was something that I love. But going back to comics, maybe to some still feel like a lesser form of reading, but it definitely has its applications for kids who are reluctant readers like myself who struggled with comprehension. And I don't want to underestimate the effectiveness of the visual narrative. And I'll give you an example. You're on an airplane, airline safety card, quick visual idea of what happens in case there's an emergency. Because if there's an actual emergency, you are not going to be calm enough to read, "Welcome to this flight. You're probably in a situation right now where you need to act quickly." It's just more easily applied to with photos. This is what happens when the oxygen mask falls. This is how you apply it. This is how you apply a life vest and things like that. Legos. Anybody from ages 3 and up can build Legos. Not a single word written down. You just look at the picture, you follow it, um, much like ancient Egyptians and their hieroglyphics. And now Garfield was this gateway drug for me towards reading. And once I went through the entire mountain of Garfield books, I slowly moved on to Calvin and Hobbes. I think that's a natural progression for most kids. You go from Garfield to, you know, Calvin and Hobbes, and then probably these days you're moving on to Pokemon books or something rather. But this also unlocked something else in me that uh, I was aware of, but no one ever said it out loud. Is that I was absolutely fascinated with drawing and copying pictures of things that I liked. I drew this Garfield and Odie when I was 6 years old. I was one of those kids who would just sit down for hours and I would try to copy a picture of something that I liked that I felt was within my abilities because I wanted to know that I could do it. And again, drawing was another thing that helped me bridge this gap between all my friends and feel, like I fit in. Because when you're a kid who can draw, it's almost like you're doing a magic trick. You're drawing a picture of a puppy, and then everyone gathers around you and they says, "Oh my gosh, look, Dan's drawing a puppy." And it was my currency for hanging out with other kids and being part of the group. Um, and I used to get so mad at myself. I used to get so mad at myself if I couldn't copy a picture of something because it meant that I had reached some sort of ceiling that I couldn't get any better than that. And for me, I never wanted to settle on the fact that I was incapable of doing something or that I couldn't teach myself to get to a higher level of ability. And this is where my parents played in because they never let me take art classes. My parents discouraged me from doing art because they wanted me to grow up and be a doctor. And I think my father sensed early on that I loved art. And I clearly remember having a parent-teacher conference with my teacher one day. I was in kindergarten, and it was just a simple task of like coloring this picture of a log cabin. And I remember my teacher, Mrs. Manzer, she gave me 2 stars. She gave me 2 stars. That was really special. And she showed my parents this drawing, and they said, "Okay, well, this is fantastic. What is this about?" And she said, "I do feel like your son does have this talent for art, and it may be something that you might want to look into." And my father said, "No, that's fine. He's here to get an education. He's here because someday he's going to be a doctor, something practical, something useful." And as the years went on, I felt like, yes, that culturally, like just being repeated over and over and over again, I felt that is my duty in life. I love art, but I can never do art. I have to do something that is more practical. But I did have this lovely librarian who in third grade, her name was Mrs. Whitley, and she pulled me aside and she said, "Mr. Santat, now I understand that your parents won't let you take art classes, but that doesn't mean you can't check out books to teach yourself how to draw. And she gave me this book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. And she checked it out for me in third grade. She said, I know that you are someone who loves to draw, and I know that this is a book that you will be able to connect with. And it'll be here in the library. You can check it out as often as you like. And she was a librarian who knew me very well. And because I was friends with her daughter, who was also in my class. And librarians just know, when you're around kids long enough, you just tend to know things about certain kids. And she knew I loved how to draw. And I checked this book out every week, all the way to sixth grade. And by the time I graduated, she said, Mr. Santat, you've checked out this book so many times. We have to get a new copy because the pages are falling out. So this book is yours. And she gave it to me, and it's still on my library shelf to this day. My kids nowadays, they'll occasionally pull it down, um, and they'll study it themselves if they want to draw something. But it was what I would probably define as the most influential book in my childhood. And again, it was a utility kind of book. And as I got older, it really got me into the next level of comics, which were Marvel comics. I had a paper route. Remember good old paper routes back in the day. I was 12 years old. I was 12 years old. I inherited this paper route from my neighborhood from this kid named Kyle Hopple. And Kyle Hopple, one day, he says, Hey, I want to show you something. And Kyle Hopple was in high school. I was still in middle school. And Kyle said, Here, let me show you something. And he opens up this big wooden trunk that he had in his room. And inside this trunk was every Marvel comic that he had collected for years, from Thor to Iron Man to the X-Men and Spider-Man and things like that. And he quickly gave me a rundown of all the narratives of all these superheroes. And then he would get another issue from another series, and then he'd show how the storyline of one comic would affect the storyline of another comic. And it was at that moment I realized that I had found my soap opera. I had found this thing that I had to check in with, weekly or monthly to find out what happened next. And so once I got that paper route, I use that money and I would go to the bookstore and I would just buy a stack of comic books. And suddenly I was a comic book nerd. And here's a picture of me comping a picture of the Incredible Hulk. Again, I was 12 years old when I did this. And so you're investing a lot of years. 6 years later, I'm able to draw this. And it wasn't something that I felt was going to be a profession. It was just something that I had taught myself from reading books, and it was something that locked into my mind uh, from someone who was absolutely reluctant about reading because I think I just started off on the wrong foot. And my collection spanned for years. I started collecting at like the age of 12. And I mean, I still read comics to this day, but my intense love of comics went all the way up to the age of 18, senior year of high school. And by then, I had lots of friends that were into comic books, and we were all, at school having lunch, and I'm showing them drawings and getting more encouragement. Actually, a little side story going back to when I was still playing graphic adventures. There was a very famous company called Sierra Games. They did games like King's Quest and Heroes Quest and Police Quest and all these other games that were graphic adventures. And they used to have a contest in their quarterly magazine where if you drew some fan art and it was published in their magazine, you could get a free video game. And so I submitted the first time and I got a video game and I got my first publication in there when I was about 13, 14. And then I started using my friends' names and I would start applying these drawings and entering as my friends. And then after that, we didn't have to buy a video game ever again because I just kept drawing and like entering this contest and winning all these video games. So it was just like a full circle moment where I fell in love with graphic adventures. I taught myself how to draw from books. And then I went back to buy more graphic adventure games for free. But the comic books, it really unleashed something in my mind. Uh, and it was the first time I had realized that I was looking forward to reading. Now, there's something about monthlies that I did find a little discouraging over time was that There were no consequences. Um, for those of you out there who did read comic books, Death in the Family, there was, and now that I think about it, it was rather morbid. They had this series arc where, Robin was captured by the Joker and he was possibly going to be killed by the Joker. You could call a hotline number and you could vote whether or not Robin lived or died. And I remember being so absolutely riveted by this because I thought, oh my gosh, this main character is going to die, and the change in the entire world of Batman is going to ripple for years and years and years. And in the end, yes, Robin did die, and then eventually Batman ended up with another Robin, some other kid. And then you also find out like this Robin didn't die. Anyway, long story arc. There were no consequences, and after that moment, I would read a Batman comic, and maybe Batman covered, with dynamite all over his chest, and the Joker's laughing and saying, "Ha ha, try to get out of this one, Batman." And I realized, well, of course he's going to get out of this because the comic is called Batman. Like he's going to get out of this somehow. And I'm getting to a point where that's just not enough for me, you know. Death of Superman. I remember it was a huge thing. It was like you're talking about the superhero of all superheroes is going to die. Yes, he did die in this comic, but then the very next month, like he came back as a different form, and I just felt like I was being pandered to. Like there was just an easy way to make a buck off, this teenager who's spending his hard-earned 4.95, right? Now, couple months later after Batman's death, I remember being at Walden Books. I think some of you probably remember, oh, the great Walden Books. Um, and I was there at the spindle. I was looking at the monthlies, and then I looked over, and there were these other comics that I didn't feel like I was supposed to know about or books that I was supposed to read. And these were like darker comics. They had more adult-like covers. Um, they weren't superheroes. This was something a little bit more taboo, a little bit darker, a little bit more. It felt it felt dangerous, like I shouldn't be reading this. And I remember being at Walden Books and then immediately just looking away from the monthlies and flipping through these comics and realizing that there were consequences, that main characters were going to get in these horrible situations and they may not actually survive. And I remember thinking, okay, I don't know if I'm going to get away with this, but I'm going to buy a stack of these comics and maybe I'll throw in a Garfield book on top of that just to be casual. And I remember going up to the front counter and putting the books there. The cashier's ringing this up, and I'm thinking she's gonna stop me. I'm not gonna get away with this. And she looks at me and she says, "That's 18.95." I took out my $20 bill and I gave it to her. And then she put it in the little Walden Books bag and it's crinkling, and I'm walking out of the mall feeling like I just robbed a bank. Like, woo! Oh my gosh, I got all these comics that I'm not supposed to read. And it just uncovered this whole other world, and then I leveled up in my fascination for reading. This is from a Japanese comic called Akira. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Akira, but it's a masterpiece out of Japan by this wonderful author named Katsuhiro Otomo. And and there were main characters that were dying. The artwork was a whole other level. It wasn't superheroes with muscles, fighting bad guys with like bombs. It was about this, this weird civil war going on in Tokyo after this mysterious nuclear explosion. It's such a long story, but if you go through it, it's absolutely worth the wait. I have every issue of this comic, and it was the thing that really made me think I would love to be a storyteller someday. And now you're thinking to yourself, and I hear a lot about this, a lot of parents discouraged about their kids reading comic books, that it's not real reading. And I will say that reading the actual book, A Wrinkle in Time, and reading the graphic novel version of A Wrinkle of Time by Hope Larson, which by the way is wonderful. But I will concur that it is two different experiences. But that does not diminish the fact that eventually you will get there. The most important element about reading is to love reading itself. Doesn't matter if it's a graphic novel, doesn't matter if it's a how-to instructional book. You just have to have the book in your hands and you have to let this child engage with it on their terms. And as I said before, I was a reluctant reader because my comprehension skills weren't great. But if you gave me a gateway to learn how to appreciate reading, it will broaden your horizons and it will allow you this opportunity to push yourself even further, right? And so one of the first books that I read that had no pictures, that I had to basically rely on my visualization and my comprehension skills was The Outsiders. It was referred to me by my friend Scott Tucker in seventh grade, and I remember reading that cover to cover, and I absolutely loved that book. And again, there was this tremendous sense of accomplishment that I, at the age of 13, 14, that I managed to read one of these books on my own. And that blossomed into other books like The Hobbit and Huck Finn and all these other things. And you appreciate these books for different reasons, right? And as you go on, as you get older, the reading still is there. I'm a huge fan of Dave Sedaris. Me Talk Pretty One Day is probably one of my favorite books of all time, and actually was a reference that I used for when I was writing my memoir, First Time for Everything. Being able to tell a story about yourself. Um, a Confederacy of Dunces. That's a story that all my friends told me. You have to read this. It's comedians read this book. It's a book that teaches comedians how to be funny. And I remember it took me 5 attempts to read that book. I struggled through that book. But by the time I read that book, I'll be honest with you, I didn't love the book. I didn't love the book, but it wasn't that I didn't love the writing. It was that Ignatius Riley is a really obnoxious person. Like I know people like that, and I don't like Ignatius Riley. Um, and then one of the recent reads that I had within the last few years, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I used to work in the video game industry, and the author clearly did her homework because she really identified the video game industry to the T, and I can admire that. Um, but it all started with comics and the love of reading. And so, how did I end up here? Okay, so I graduated from high school, and you can see the look on my face. I am not thrilled from graduating high school because I was going to go into a career path, into a life that was not of my choosing, and it already felt like a death sentence. I already knew I didn't want to be a doctor, and I attended UC San Diego. There's the Giza Library, where it was named after Mr. Dr. Seuss Theodore Geisel, and he had all this original artwork hanging up in the library. And I remember everybody just walking by all this original Dr. Seuss art, not paying any attention to it. And I remember thinking to myself, why isn't everybody losing their minds that we have original Dr. Seuss art on these walls? And as the years went on through college, I got a microbiology degree. I got accepted into dental school, and I was this close. I was this close to becoming a dentist. But it was my college roommates. They were the ones that pulled me aside, and they said, "Look, we know that you love video games. We know you love to draw. We know you love comics. We know you hate the idea of being a doctor. So why are you doing it?" And I said, "It's because it's the practical thing to do." And my parents, I feel like I owe it to them. They've spent their entire lives. They immigrated to this country. They had all these hopes and expectations that I'd be a doctor. I owe it to them to be a doctor, to do what they asked me to do. And they said, "But can you see yourself being a dentist for the rest of your life?" And the thought really made me miserable. And I honestly, I kind of felt like, is that what being an adult is supposed to be? You're just supposed to slave through things, not for yourself, but for others, for your family, for kids, for your parents. And, my friend who was a communications major, he said to me, he said, like, I'm getting a communications degree. I have absolutely no idea what I'm going to do with this degree. And he's absolutely right. Statistically, 87% of people don't do anything with their college degree. Um, and they didn't propose this in a way that felt like I was defying my parents. They said, "Aren't you curious to see if you're good enough to get into art school?" And I thought, yeah, there's no harm in that. There's no harm in me seeing if I'm good enough to be in art school. Maybe I should just make a portfolio, apply to art school, see if I can get into art school. And so I went all over San Diego. I went over to different workshops all over the county, throwing together a portfolio in about 10, 12 weeks. Sent submissions, the Art Center College of Design, Cal Arts, RISD, all these wonderful schools. Got in, and on my graduation day, I'm getting my college diploma. I'm sitting with my girlfriend, now wife, at dinner, and my father says, "Proud of you, son. Are you ready to go off and be a doctor?" And I said, "Dad, I got into art school." And his whole world just stopped, and he stared at me, and you could just see this pain in his eyes. And he didn't understand what was going on. And I said, "Dad, I've always loved art, and I want to be an artist, and I'm going to do this whether you like it or not." And he looked at me, and you could see the little hamster wheel spinning in his head, knowing that the next words that were coming out of his mouth were going to be very important. And he said to me, he said, "Well, I had this dream that you and I were both going to be doctors, but in the end, all I want is for you to be happy." And that was absolutely liberating to me. I ended up going to art school. It was the first time I had ever taken any art instruction class. Up to this point, it was all by books. I was completely self-taught. And one of the things I realized was that I taught myself well enough with books that I didn't really need art school, other than maybe a few foundational skills that were accelerated because I was in a company of people who were extremely talented. Some of my roommates, who you might know, Peter Brown, who did The Wild Robot. He was an art school roommate of mine. Another friend of mine, Chris Applehan. He is the co-writer director of K-pop Demon Hunters. These were the kind of people that I went to art school with, right? And at the time, no one wanted to go into children's publishing. Everyone wanted to work in video games or get a job at Pixar or Disney, or work in a gallery or do magazines. But the only two kids that wanted to do children's books were Peter Brown and myself. And in order for me to understand the business, I did my research and I went back and I read a lot of those classics that I had missed out on. Um, and then also I met other people. I read contemporary works. I read No David, just when it had won a Caldecott honor. I went to David Shannon's house. I saw his Caldecott honor certificate, thinking this is the closest I'm ever going to get to seeing one of these things. And he was absolutely encouraging, and he gave me and nurtured me all this stuff about getting into children's publishing. And he recommended a book, Complete Idiot's Guide to Children's Publishing. And I read that book cover to cover, taught myself how to get into children's publishing, how to write an inquiry letter. It informed me about the SCBWI, an organization, Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, that I joined, right? And out of art school, one of my first jobs was making video games because I thought, you know what, I love making art, but it wasn't fulfilling to me because I realized that I still missed that story element of art. Um, and 2 years out of art school, I had my first book deal through Arthur Levine. He met me at a children's book conference, and he gave me a two-book deal. I don't have a story about getting hundreds of rejection letters. I read about how to get into publishing. I did the research, I did the work, and I just came over prepared to this conference, and I met Arthur Levine. Um, and I didn't have any connections. Most of it was just self-taught. And then the book spurns other opportunities. And you think maybe, oh, maybe I want to have a cartoon show. And I had a cartoon show on Disney Channel, which to me, I thought this is the pinnacle of storytelling. This is the pinnacle of what an artist dreams of, to have their own cartoon show on Disney Channel. But I actually absolutely loathed it because I wasn't there in the company to please the viewers, the kids. I was there to please executives. And I found that to be unfaithful to the craft of storytelling. And so I eventually left the video game company. I eventually left animation and I sat down and I just worked on books. But that does not mean that there was not another calling. I did get an offer to be the creative director at Google. And in the back of my mind, there was this feeling of like, this is a duty that I have to fulfill because, I am now a parent, I own a house. Um, and if I take this job, there's job security for the rest of my life. But I remember realizing that it was not something that I wanted. And I would ask other children's book authors, I'd say, well, suppose that Google came to you and offered you a job as creative director. Would you take it? And I have to say, surprisingly, about 80% of the authors that I asked said they would. But I remember being a little shocked, a little upset at the idea that they would accept that proposal. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm hoping someone is trying to pull me off this ledge and tell me no, because you got to keep it real and you got to do what you love. And I remember fighting off Google with these phone calls, asking me if I wanted to take the job, just dodging them like Neo in the Matrix, like dodging bullets. And coming full circle, I ended up at San Diego Comic-Con and I'm at a Disney rooftop party for the replacements. And the cast of Heroes, I don't know if you remember that old NBC show Heroes, the cast of Heroes walks in, and behind them comes Stan Lee. And Stan Lee sees me in my cargo shorts and Spider-Man t-shirt, and I was so embarrassed. I buttoned it up. I put on this button-up shirt. I didn't want him. I didn't want to be another one of those fans. And he immediately looks at me and he says, "You look like a comic book loving type, like in those cargo shorts. Like, what are you doing here? You're not a Disney executive." And I said, "Well, first of all, I want to thank you because I actually learned how to draw from your book, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way." And I told him the entire journey about how my parents wanted me to be a doctor and how I wanted to be a comic artist or a storyteller. And all these people are coming up to Stan Lee and they're saying, "Hey, can I take a picture? Can I take a picture?" And Stan was so riveted by my story. He said, "I'll be with you in a minute. I'm talking to my friend here." And for a good 45 minutes, he treated me like I was the only person on that rooftop. And I told him the story and I told him that I was at a point where I said, I'm here because I have a cartoon show that I don't love. I used to work in video games, a craft that I don't admire. Um, and now I have this job offer from Google. And I feel like I should take it because I owe it to my family. And he said to me, he says, "But what does your heart tell you?" And I said, my my hope is that I want to give publishing a fair shot because I want to know how good I can be. And I think I wouldn't be able to live with myself asking myself that question of what could have been. And he says, "Well, then I think that's the right answer. Don't don't do things because you feel it's bestowed upon you, that you feel like you have to. Do the work you love and the money will find you." And the full circle moment was that Stan Lee, this man that I idolized, this man that helped me get into books, this man who wrote a book about how to do what he does for a living. And I'm standing in this moment, very surreal moment, thinking like, is this destiny? Was this meant to be? But it spelled everything out. And so from that day on, I moved on and I focused entirely on books. And Beagle was a publication that I don't think a lot of people expected from me. Everyone, early in the publishing world thought that I was this funny guy, that I did these funny, Ninja Pig books and things like that. And I decided I wanted to write my own narrative. I had heartfelt stories that I wanted to share, stories about family, stories about my wife, like After the Fall, it's a love letter to my wife. things like that. And here I am in this business for 21 years, and I've done over 120 books for kids. And now we're at this point where I think we're thinking about libraries, and I owe it to all of you because you're all arbiters of taste. Uh, when you go to a library and you see a kid who doesn't know what to read, you're the ones that know what's good and you know what will connect with a kid because I experienced it firsthand, right? But there is this, I don't want to say it's a stigma, but I think there's this branding issue with libraries. People scratch their heads. They don't know what to make of libraries. They don't know what they're going to use it for. And I don't think it's not that the libraries don't offer these resources. I just think there's a branding issue that people just don't know what to use it for. I remember when I was a kid, when I had to study for a high school test, we would all meet at the library and we would all study. Now it's about coffee shops. Everyone goes to the coffee shops. It doesn't have to be a quiet environment. It's this place that feels like their living room. They can get a snack whenever they want. Every coffee shop I go to, every table is taken, right? I don't know if a lot of people are aware of these amazing movie nights. I remember when I was a kid, I went to go see Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, with a room of other kids watching Ghostbusters, Karate Kid, things like that. There was a sense of community that the library fostered that I really enjoyed. I had school friends, but then I had library friends. I don't know if you guys had that. The Houston Public Library, I don't know if the downtown branch. I remember I was there doing an event and I saw one of the most fascinating things ever, where they had this after school curriculum. They had this after school program, offered manga, offered video games, offered after school tutoring. It's a lot of work, but what I found absolutely wonderful about it was that it was a safe space for kids to go to after school if their parents were at work. Um, I saw that model and I thought this is what a library is all about. It's all about community. It's all about fostering, a sense of community, which we're slowly losing because of social media. Social media promised that it would bring everyone closer. It's done the exact opposite. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I've kind of get to a point where I find myself going to more figure drawing workshops. I find myself going to more sporting events and more concerts because I have this greater need to feel human, to go to an Oasis concert and you're singing the lyrics back to Liam Gallagher along with other people who are singing the same lyrics because there's a human aspect of that you don't get on social media, which has just left everyone very jaded because of the algorithm. I need to escape real life and engage, well, the real life of social media and engage with people to remind myself what it is to be human. And I think libraries provide that opportunity. Um, and for the next, what can I say? The next stage of my career, my emphasis is going to be about engaging kids with reading to help them rediscover that fun of reading, to make sure that they don't feel like it's work. Because I know that reading, if given the right book, can be a gateway towards bigger things. And that is that is my conclusion. Let me stop my share. Thank you very much.
Dan, we have a few questions that people have
Sounds
posed.
good.
All right. Josh asks, Dan, with your parents prioritizing you becoming a part of the American melting pot, how important do you view assimilation and connecting with your neighbors while also having links to your heritage?
That's a fascinating question. So, I've actually had this conversation with people like Jean Yang, who did American Born Chinese. American Born Chinese was one of those books that I read where I grew up being so American that I wouldn't say I ignored it, but my parents prioritized this need for me to not feel alienated from everybody else. Um, but also shaming me because I didn't have that sense of Thai Thai heritage. But culturally, it was hard because what typically happens is that you will find a community of like people. So like in my town, you had the Chinese American Club, you had Little Tokyo, you had your Korean community, you had your Vietnamese community. But if you ran into another person from Thailand, that was like meeting a unicorn. Like it was a very rare case, right? And so um there was a tremendous amount of shame that I had about not embracing my heritage and also not being able to understand it fully, but also my parents not having the resources to share that with me because they didn't have a lot of their childhood photos. They There wasn't much in terms of a Thai community. So I think a lot of my life was emphasized by fitting into the community, but kind of being kind of being a ghost in terms of my past, not really knowing anything about myself. And you would have people asking me like, "Oh, what is the Thai culture like?" And I couldn't give them an answer.
Mm.
But that did come a lot later in high school, and that came from visiting Thailand and meeting my relatives for the very first time. But this wasn't until like my junior, senior year of high school. But I had wished that I experienced that so much sooner, and I wish I had known my parents as kids a lot earlier because it would have just explained so much. Um, Now I'm not as comfortable as say Grace or Jean in terms of storytelling about that culture, but I am getting better at it. And having manuscripts like drawn together land on my lap are opportunities for me to really embrace that. And yeah, I still continue to grow.
That's awesome. In a similar vein, kind of moving along from that, Terry asks, how do you go about encouraging your children to pursue their passions?
Um, I So in order for them to pursue their passions, I don't hover over them. I think my parents, they constantly were just injecting this idea that I should be a doctor. And I remember the only thing that it fostered in me was resentment because I didn't, it was just this constant reminder of like, oh, you owe this to us, you owe this to us. And I never wanted my kids to feel like that. And so I pretty much I let the reins go and I let my kids figure things out on their own. And they're savvy enough that if they're curious about something, they will find the resources that they need to get to where they need to go. So my oldest son, he's been struggling a little bit. Originally, he was going to go to a four-year college, but he didn't know what major to declare. And I don't blame him because I think so many kids are spending so much time just trying to get into college that by the time they're asked what major they want to pursue for the rest of their lives, it's a question because they've never really taken the time to learn who they are as people. And so he didn't like the idea of just going to the college and not heading towards some direction. But eventually he found that maybe he was interested in art, but he also made it clear that he didn't want to follow in my footsteps. Um, and so he's in a transition right now of possibly becoming an artist. My younger son, I think it's a little bit different because he does not have the artistic gene in him. But he also feels a little tied down by all this talk about AI and things like that. And so he is pursuing, we're going through college applications right now. He's pursuing a business degree, but with an emphasis on things that he likes, like business, for sports or fashion or music. And I just basically provide a supporting role in any way possible. But if I, the least likely person who ever anticipated becoming a children's book author and ending up, in this situation, can get where they need to go, I'm pretty confident my kids, who are much smarter than I am, can do it as well.
Dakota says that your graphic memoir was the first graphic that they read when they started working at the library, and it won Dakota over to graphic novels as a whole. What
Great.
were some memoirs, graphic or otherwise, that inspired you during the time you were doing your memoir?
So all the works of David Sedaris, obviously. American-born Chinese. Well, it's not a memoir, but just Gene Yang was the one that recommended that I make a memoir. We were at the Miami Book Festival. We were at the airport. We were telling our stories of how we ended up being two Asians in children's publishing. And he said to me, your story's fascinating. You should write a book about that. So Gene Yang, thankfully, he was the one um, that told me to go in that direction. But I was also in the company of a lot of people who were also interested in doing that same format. So, I was comparing notes with Shannon Hale. I was comparing notes with Jared Krasoska, and Raina Telgemeier. And at the time, I think Raina was the only one that was known for making these memoir kind of graphic novels, whereas I was telling everybody as early as 2011 that I was planning on doing a memoir, but it took so long. And I'm watching Jarrett publish his, I'm watching Shannon publish hers, and I just ended up being like one of the last ones. It took me the longest to do that. But then, you have other great graphic memoirs like um, Blankets was another one that was really good. Um, Oh my God, Stitches was heartbreaking. But yeah, you read it, and Understanding Comics was another important book. Uh, but yeah, American Splendor, that was another great one by Harvey P. Carr.
Thank you. All right, two more super quick questions.
Sure, sure.
What is your favorite baseball team?
Oh, the Dodgers. I was like on the fence whether I was going to wear the Dodgers hat or not. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. And what is your favorite dinosaur?
My favorite dinosaur is I mean, yeah, okay. It's the Ankylosaurus, which is like not the answer anybody says. So, for those of you who don't know, the Ankylosaurus looks absolutely absurd. So it has this hard shell on its back, and then it has spikes all around the side of its body, and then it even has like a hard shell on its head, and then it has like this knobbed club for a tail. And I look at this completely absurd dinosaur, realizing this is evolution taking dramatic steps to ensure the survival of this creature, right? Oh, you can't attack it from the sides, you can't bite it from the top, you can't bite its head, and then it has a club for a tail. Like it was like the epitome of of survival in the Jurassic era. And then you look at it and you say, this is completely absurd. So it's I'll look it up, Ankylosaurus.
That is great. I think that's the one that the Thagomizer was like the end of their tail was named by Gary Larson,
Oh
and
my gosh.
scientists ended up taking their tail as like that's the name of. Oh, I'm wrong. It's a Stegosaurus. I'm wrong. I knew someone would correct me.
That's hilarious.
We have some more questions, but we have run out of time with you.
Oh,
Um, and so can I ask if we can email you these questions and you
sure,
can do a
certainly.
short answer and we'll put that up on
Yeah,
our recording page?
that'd be great.
Awesome.
That'd be great.
Thank you so much, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh,
Oh, Abby, we
Bingo.
can't hear you.
Can you
There
hear
you
me
go.
now? There,
Yes, we
see,
can.
me and microphones. Thank you so much, Dan, for giving that wonderful talk. I think that we all feel a little bit more excited about librarians, and you kind of gave us some things to think about that, we are, what did you say, arbiters of taste, which is a fantastic way to say, yep, we are still important. And I do want to make an awesome announcement for the 2026 year. Dan is going to be our summer reading champion, which is very exciting. I'm going to put a link in here to kind of just show you guys. Oh, let me put it to the right person to show you guys if you want to click on that link. He has created some really interesting some posters and some drawing a dinosaur sheet already that you can access. So thank you so much, Dan. We are so excited to see you be our summer reading champion next year. And with that, we are going to be taking a half an hour break. So from right now until 12:45, you are free to go about your day, eat lunch. If it's too early, maybe breakfast. And then we will see everybody back at 12:45, and we will get into the manual with Amanda.